Should be able to hear you now.
Right, so welcome back. So we're just waiting on Councillor in, and I think she'll just return her time. So item number 8 is, the presentation is closed on the Commission's community safety remit, focusing on disorder scrutiny, compliance and best practice, which Anthony Lewis, Interim Director of Community Safety and Integrated Enforcement, will present virtually on the screen. Yes, when you're ready, you can introduce yourself and provide a presentation, please.
Thanks, Councillor. Good evening all. So I'm Anthony Lewis. I'm the relatively new Director for Community Safety and Integrated Enforcement at Southwark Council. So obviously there'll be a more in-depth kind of session in relation to Community Safety Partnership later in the year, but today is very much just kind of setting out the kind of specific basis for this committee's role as the official crime and disorder scrutiny committee for the local authority and for the Community Safety Partnership. So just to give a very quick overview, and you'll get this in some packs that Manny Headley's got in terms of broader scrutiny training. So just a quick explanation in terms of what Community Safety Partnerships are, just in case anyone's not aware. So they are a multi-agency statutory partnership that was created nationally in 1998. So it incorporates a number of primary responsible authorities. So that's the local authority, the police, health, probation, the fire service, and they have a number of statutory duties, including creating a multi-year strategy, annual delivery plans, and those in turn need to be informed by strategic assessments that then obviously are evidence-based and highlighting the key crime and disorder issues and trends that are affecting that particular area, in this case the borough of Southwark. So in response to creating those partnerships in 2006, basically the decision was to make a specific function of local authority scrutiny committees to act as a critical friend for those community safety partnerships. And in terms of that legislation, this just very much kind of summarises it. This slide basically said that at least annually, obviously that scrutiny group would convene and obviously hold that community safety partnership to account. In terms of the remit of that piece of work and that particular focus, it's about how those 5 responsible authorities are working collectively and at a strategic level to reduce crime and disorder issues across the borough. So it's not about, for example, the data activities or of individual responsible agencies or how they've dealt with specific individual cases. It's very much about how you come together collaboratively as the primary responsible authorities to tackle the issues that have been identified are a priority for our borough. And again, if there are kind of individual issues that obviously require kind of further focus, they get picked up obviously through the relevant oversight and governance processes for those individual agencies, be they health, local authority or police, for example. Go to the next slide, please, Julie. So in terms of the legal framework, I'll give a quick overview. We go to the next slide. So again, as I say, in 2006, we had the Police and Justice Act, and that set out this requirement to have a crime and disorder scrutiny committee. So again, it is different from the 2011 legislation that most other scrutiny of the council obviously has oversight of and delivers through its committees, and it is enshrined in this very specific piece of legislation that, interestingly, wasn't repealed when the broader 2011 powers were introduced to councils. And this legislation and the schedules and the statutory guidance that goes with it are still in effect to this day, albeit being 20 years old this year. Okay, if we go to the next slide, please. So in terms of those responsibilities, as I said, so there's a responsibility for the Crime and Disorder Committee, however that's formed, whether that's delegated to a committee such as this or one that's specifically formed for that purpose, to scrutinise the partnership as a whole, at least annually. It's very much kind of looking about how the partnership is fulfilling its statutory duties around attempting to reduce crime and disorder, and particularly around how it's delivering its strategy and its plans, and looking at the approach in which they've gone about developing and delivering those strategies, the decisions and actions made by the Community Safety Partnership as a collective, and really acting as that critical friend. So actually, how could the CSP improve its performance? How could it actually engage with sort of residents or communities that actually sometimes statutory partners struggle to hear, want to engage with effectively? So that's very much kind of the aim and the intent of the legislation when it was passed. Okay, if we move to the next slide, please. So in terms of those powers, they are similar to the 2011 but slightly different. So obviously Scrutiny can request information and it can request the attendance of the 5 responsible authorities. There's a caveat around reasonable advance notice in the legislation and guidance, which is where we tend to have protocols. Again, obviously the scrutiny, like most other areas, sort of processes can request information, but again, it just has to make sure that information request wouldn't prejudice legal proceedings or an ongoing or live investigation, for example, or any forthcoming operations either. Obviously, on the flip side, the responsible authorities must, so those that's the local authority, the police, probation, etc., have to pay due regard to recommendations by the committee, and if they choose not to adopt those, obviously they have to provide a reasonable explanation. And again, which is slightly different from the 2011 legislation, there are specific deadlines in terms of that response. So effectively, it's 28 days from which the recommendations are formally submitted to the partners to consider. Next slide, please. So there are kind of best practice kind of recommendations. So there was kind of statutory guidance that was issued by the Home Office, or at least 17 years ago now, which sets out obviously how that process should be followed in an ideal world, and also sort of recommends the creation of a protocol to kind of facilitate that between the Community Safety Partnership and the scrutiny functions fulfilling the crime disorder sort of committee role. So if we go to the next slide. So those core principles said is very much about focusing on how holistically are those 5 responsible authorities trying to address the crime disorder issues in the borough and have a positive impact. What constructive challenge can be put to those partners as a whole. Making sure that's got strategic focus and it's very much around assessing the outcomes and again how the partnership is going to demonstrate that it's having that positive impact in terms of tackling those issues. And again, relying on evidence in terms of data and perspectives from the local community in terms of how that's being achieved and kind of assessing progress. So in terms of the approach, the guidance very much kind of suggests kind of looking at cross-cutting themes. So that could be around this antisocial behaviour, that could be youth crime, that could be violence against women and girls. Very much kind of encourages those partnership contributions. So again, not listening to 1 or 2 sort of agencies, but encouraging obviously the partnership as a whole to obviously engage and participate and contribute. And again, where appropriate, getting those different perspectives, either from volunteering community sector organisations, sort of public as witnesses, or other advocates we've got within the community that can give that perspective. And again, obviously making sure therefore that any recommendations that are kind of made and then kind of followed up and monitored in terms of the initial response, and then for those that are accepted, obviously their implementation. As mentioned before, obviously Scrutiny Committee obviously can request information. It does recommend that those are obviously focused and thought through in terms of obviously being relevant to the themes or the topics that are going to be scrutinised, and trying to make sure it's obviously not duplicating reports that are being requested, whether around specific issues or by the committees. And equally, in terms of responsible authorities, making sure that the information they're giving is relevant to what the committees are looking to try and focus, and obviously it assists in that conversation and that constructive challenge. Next slide, please. So in terms of mentioned before, but again, it's kind of emphatic in the kind of best practice guidance. It's very much about making sure that is a collective understanding in terms of how they're delivering. So again, quite often, and sometimes there's a temptation to focus particularly on the police, because that is the primary agency that people associate in terms of crime disorder. But it is about making sure that all of the partners are fulfilling their function and understand what their responsibilities are in terms of working in a multi-agency setting, and making sure that that's being reflected in terms of the delivery and the partnership work and the strategies. And again, as I mentioned before, if there are particularly individual issues around very specific operational matters or cases, again, the recommendation is that's taken through the respective government processes for each of those individual agencies, because this is very much about a strategic perspective in terms of delivery across the borough. Okay, next slide. So very much in terms of that, it recommends, obviously, that there's a protocol, because again, we are talking about then the coordinating of 5 responsible authorities and making sure that relatively senior people are able to kind of attend and contribute to the scrutiny process. So it recommends that obviously we clarify those roles and responsibilities, the expectations in terms of obviously how topics are chosen, the timescales in which information needs to be supplied, and the way in which obviously the chairs, in particular the CSP, kind of engage and kind of support that moving forward. And in terms of kind of next steps, see in terms of the CSP, because they're currently in the process of finalising their new strategy. They've kind of agreed in that kind of process as well to obviously endorse that creation of a shared protocol, and obviously meet with the committee chairs in advance of the first session to make sure, again, that there's common understanding, and that the first session is obviously as productive as possible in terms of understanding those issues and challenges within Southwark, and how the partnerships are looking to move forward with its new strategic priorities in the future. I think that's kind of the key gist of it, Chair. As I mentioned before, there is a more detailed slide deck that has been shared with organisation development. We'll go out with a broader sort of scrutiny training offer to all members. Whenever there's any other kind of questions about, obviously, the role of scrutiny or kind of the functions of the CSP.
For that. Does anyone have any questions that you want to clarify from that?
Thank you for your presentation, Anthony. So I guess my question is around, again, this is to do with obviously our role in regards to scrutinising this community safety partnership. I find it quite difficult to find anything about the community safety partnership on the Southwark Council website, including the strategy, the current strategy. I know I've brought this up when we spoke. So there are all the strategic assessments for 21, 22 and 23, 24. I think you said that the Community Safety Partnership doesn't publish its minutes. They're not public documents. So it's quite hard for us to scrutinise an organisation that's not very available and transparent, I would say.
So I think, yes, it does vary quite considerably. So there is no, that in terms of the partnership themselves, they're not, the CSPs are not public meetings. So I think there's variations in terms of the decisions from borough to borough in terms of whether they do publish any minutes, for example, and whether they're redacted, given whether or not they contain obviously sensitive information. In terms of the strategy, I think as we discussed previously, so we'll certainly get that across to you. I think the current priorities are listed on the web page that does exist for the Community Safety Partnership alongside the previous year's strategic needs assessment. But in terms of that discussion with the two chairs, we'll make sure in terms of any relevant information that's kind of needed to assist, obviously, scrutiny and fulfilling its function will be supplied.
Thank you. Just with awareness of time, does anyone Councillor?
Yes, I just wanted something to be noted on the records. There were two presentations today. This one, the one that Julia did, that I actually think would have been better done as pre-meets, just so that we could get abreast of it, because I know that I'm going to call, his name's not added. Oh. Anthony Lewis. I know that Anthony's given an overview of the statutory functions and will help us to go over what the CSP does, etc., etc. But I do think that could have been done in a pre-meet, and perhaps the draft strategy should be available so that we are able to contribute to that. In support of David's comments around it being more participatory. This is something that has been discussed on multiple occasions about the visibility of some of the stuff around community safety, and I'm in full support of that. So I do think that perhaps behind closed doors, these types of statutory guidelines and setting the parameters are best done within that space, and then hopefully we can contribute to the draft strategy once it's available.
I don't know if you would like to comment on that, Anthony, about this idea. My understanding is that the draft strategy is a process that's kind of being done, or isn't it done?
So yeah, so the decision, because obviously there's an annual kind of timeline in terms of when it needs to be agreed. So the CSP's already taken the decision in terms of the current strategy, in terms of what those priorities are. However, obviously in terms of that process, there's an annual plan that's developed in terms of then delivering those priorities. So very much, because this is the very start of the strategy process, Scrutiny will have the opportunity to kind of shape and influence both the action plans in terms of the current year, but also any feedback from Scrutiny, for example, if that happens in October and November, will go into the annual refresh of the priorities. So in addition to the strategy, every year the Community Safety Partnership needs to re-look at those priorities and make sure they're still relevant and evidence-based. So very much that influence in terms of Scrutiny's input will be reflected in terms of that annual process.
Thank you, because I'm not going to consider I was a bit rattled by seeing the statutory guidelines as opposed to clarity on what's happening across the borough in the summer, in light of the fact that this is a health and adult social care board, and there's clearly a crossover with health, adult social care and community safety, and that's quite coherent across the piece. Without going into too much detail, in many respects, I guess our communities expect us to be able to look at specific issues, and we won't be given them. So maybe we have an additional agenda item in the near future, because this today's meeting didn't actually look at anything substantive for community safety. But I guess we can look at that again when we look at the work plan.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, we all get to look at the work plan shortly. So thank you for that suggestion. And yeah, I thank Councillors Noakes and Anne both for that, because it is, as you said, very important, and to have that level of transparency and opportunity for oversight is very important. And I think a few of us maybe share that frustration of lack of that maybe transparency, understanding what's going on there. Okay, again, with an eye on the time, should we move on to the final one? Okay, thank you, Director Lewis.
Anthony.
Thank you. Good night.
So item 9 actually was the Silent Road Care delivery update, which is just a document to note. So that has been and there has been a few questions about that. It was obviously very much on the agenda of the previous commission. My understanding is that we're going to be looking to get an update on a quarterly basis. Was that right? Something like that. It's just that we have an eye on that developed as it goes ahead. Okay. So the work plan. So obviously we've discussed this informally a number of times. The draft. So there's a paper on the work plan which is enclosed in the agenda, so that is gone out on the public agenda, and that sets up the process for agreeing the commission program, which will be finalised in the autumn. So the target will be for the first meeting in the autumn, whenever that is. And it's currently set for a date in October, but we consider moving it earlier to discuss if necessary. And then a paper which has been set out informally, a draft paper is also tabled to set up the emergent topics and items for discussion tonight, and further input over some from officers, the community safety partnership, health colleagues, and cabinet members. So yeah, if anyone would like to add anything to that draft paper on the record now, you're welcome to do so. Or just anything you'd like to reinforce for public consumption. Yes.
There's some minor things, they're not big things, but they might be things you might want to have a quick look over. So there's things like wheelchair charging in King's Hospital. Community's not very happy about that, so that might be something I want to look at. Simple things like if we're looking at prevention of like and the burden on adult services, we should be looking at the early years of like having the nurse back in school and testing children, screening children for things like dyslexia and ADHD, which I know previous councillors have put that forward to certain committees, and it costs very little. It's like something like £10 per child, so it's a very low cost. I know it might be linking with education as well. Yeah, and also the other things that I'm happy with from the the draft that we talked about before. Yeah, there are just a couple of little things that we might want to just look at.
Yes.
Just wanted to say that in view of Monday's news, I don't think we need to do number 6, the dementia services. That was one thing, and then the other thing, so it's taking something away, but I would like to formally object to the idea that this commission is responsible for the private renting sector stuff. I believe that should belong. I know it comes under the community safety brief, but I believe that should belong in the housing commission. I think this commission is already full enough.
Second that.
Yeah, just for context on that, I think has been a request maybe that we look into private sector licensing, which does fall under the community safety brief in terms of the organisation of the council. Yeah, I would agree with that. There's a kind of strategic question of how housing is managed there, which I think yes we looked at under the housing brief. I think maybe that's a discussion we can have with our colleagues in the housing commission over the summer.
Am I correct in the only thing?
Mike.
Sorry, did somebody have something to say? Sorry.
Yeah, I think it's you.
So community safety, it has 2 items on Monday, and that's it for you. So that's the community safety partnership with focus on antisocial behaviour jobs, and then pre-scrutiny decision about the integrated alcohol treatment services on my reading this time.
Yeah, okay. So, the meeting in autumn, it's got the community safety partnership coming on the annual presentation.
Yes.
And also to throw in some evidence on the proposed review on antisocial behaviour and drugs. But that doesn't mean that would be the end of it, because if the commission did decide to go ahead with looking at that as a review, then you would normally take further evidence, and that would be done to each other. Yeah.
I'm just mindful that between May and October is 6 months. So that means there's a period of 6 months where we have no understanding of what's happening within the community safety landscape. So I'm hoping it can be brought forward slightly just so that we can see the draft of the partnership as well.
So the community safety partnership, so the borough commanders and the co-chairs, that's in draft to come to the probably either if they are going to be ready to come in October, and so they will set out. They're going to share the draft strategy, and there'll be a chance for you to scrutinise that in October, around about October or November, the second meeting probably. But you can also do additional work if, as a commission, you decide to do that.
So it will be primarily community. The meeting on the 12th will be primarily on community safety.
So let me just maybe we can discuss the just the discussions Julie and I have had about American right. So there's a piece about the drug and alcohol treatment services again is currently the process being recommissioned. The deadline for that is, as I understand, the scrutiny, the call-in date for scrutiny on that is sometime in early October. So we wanted to look at that in September, basically. Then so that's a substantive item in that, which we kind of, there's a time frame on that. Then there's a question of what are we going to do with the other piece in there. And that's kind of a debate and discussion. So there's something such that they would, if we did that in September, then they wouldn't be ready with the community safety partnership. So that was kind of the reason that we put in that into the subsequent meeting. But what we put with the other substantive item we put in that meeting is kind of up for debate a little bit. We can discuss that. So that would probably be, we're discussing dates in September for that. So one option would be we're discussing the CPC report into adult social care with emphasis on safeguarding, because that got requires improvements on the CPC report. So that needs to go in summer. We're kind of thinking of putting it in potentially in September. That would also kind of be nice because we'd be looking at things that are both in the investigative depth Kirk Thornton's agreement. So we get him in to talk about a bunch of stuff. And then that would leave an October, November meeting that might be more focused on community safety. So that would be looking at the community safety partnership and then potentially another piece that we want to focus on. So it could be something to do with, I know we talked about violence against ordinary girls. that does have a connection to the overall review we were looking at with regards to drug misuse or absolutely antisocial behaviour, because obviously there's connections there. First, in terms of like street harassment, street safety, but also in terms of sexual exploitation. So again, we have to, so there's a few potential kind of directions we can do there. And then that leaves then the kind of pieces of the early part of next year, but not for grabs. So we've got a bunch of ideas, a bunch of items we kind of think about how we'll sort them in, and then how we draw a line through all of them in terms of the broader look at, yes, drug misuse, rough sleeping, antisocial behaviour, that whole connection. So that's my thinking about it. I hope it sort of makes sense, but if anyone wants to say anything particular to that now, or add other items just to be included that kind of fit in somewhere, Councillor.
I mean, just to the point, I suppose, as Catherine's point, I do think obviously, the remit is big, there's no doubt about that. But yes, also I think community safety is a very important part of our remit. I'm hoping, but I think this might be happening with when we do our piece of work on the CSP strategy, but is it my understanding that the borough commander potentially will be coming to that? Because I just would like, I know we've been told I'd like to monitor the day-to-day performance of the police, but I'm afraid I'm still waiting to see the borough commander and see the borough commander, because I think they need to be helpful. So
I think without the data to hand, without the CSP strategy and the annual plan, I think it's very difficult to hold a borough commander to hand, because you'll be relying on stats. So that document is really important in telling us what has been done and why those priorities have been chosen. And I think you made some very fair contributions about the lack of visibility on specific things. Maybe that's a recommendation that can be taken forward.
Thanks, excellent points from both here. Everyone else has been a bit quiet. Anyone else? I think I'm going to sign out a bit late. That's it. Everyone's free to contribute. I've emphasised that everyone's free to contribute informally in between meetings, so we can kind of work on the agenda together, and hopefully we'll have something that's pretty solid. We can just approve maybe by the next one processes at the start of next meeting for work time. Anyone else? So 234, that's not too bad. Anything else I need to do?